country. I'm joined exclusively now in studio here by Republican Governor of Texas, Rick Perry. Governor, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you, sir.
I wanted to start here because of all the controversy around the death penalty. Again, you've got 273 people on death row in Texas. After what happened in Oklahoma, do you expect more challenges?
Well, state by state, those decisions are made about how you're going to punish those who commit the most heinous crimes against your citizens. And in Texas, for a substantially long period of time, our citizens have decided that if you kill our children, if you kill our police officers, for those very heinous crimes, that the appropriate punishment is the death penalty. I think we have an appropriate process in place from the standpoint of the appeals process to make sure that due process is addressed. And the process of the actual execution, I will suggest to you, is very different from Oklahoma. We only use one drug. But I'm confident that the way that the executions are taken care of in the state of Texas are appropriate.
And humane.
And humane.
Was this inhumane?
I don't know whether it was inhumane or not, but it was botched. And I hope that not only the governor, the legislators will look at the process in Oklahoma.
But you don't even want to see, even somebody convicted of a heinous crime, you don't want to see the government responsible for forcing a heart attack because they couldn't inject the proper lethal drugs.
There's an appropriate way to deal with this, and obviously something terribly wrong.
Is it appropriate for a pause in our national discussion and application of the death penalty? The president talking about bias, uneven application, soul-searching questions that he'd like the country to take. Do you agree with that as a governor?
There may be appropriate for a pause in Oklahoma, but here's where the president and I disagree. He all too often, whether it's on health care or whether it's on education or whether it's on this issue of how states deal with the death penalty, he looks for a one-size-fits-all solution centric to Washington, D.C., and I will suggest to you that's one of the problems we have in this country. We're a very diverse country, and allow the states on these issues that aren't addressed directly by the Constitution to come up with the solutions. I think the country would be happier, for one thing. I know the country would be more economically viable.
Let me ask you about the economy. A lot of discussion about the Obama recovery this week. People will look at that in different ways. Here's a couple of different stats, and I want to get your take on it. The latest jobs report had the creation of 288,000 jobs in April. That's the most in more than 2 years. But here's another stat, which is the labor force shrinking by 806,000 people in April. People getting out of the business of looking for a job. Of those two stats, what best represents the Obama recovery, the Obama economy?
Well, let me say this. Job creation is good. And if the president and Washington would focus on policies that help create jobs, then this country would be substantially better off.
But so then do you give this president credit for more robust growth that we've started to see after the winter months?
You know, that might be a bit of a stretch. I think the bigger issue is the people who have lost hope.
Yeah.
I mean, those 800,000+ people who have just quit looking. I mean, they know they're not going to get a job. It's the people who are underemployed in this country that we need to be focused on. The policies that allow for job creation are really pretty simple. It's tax policy, it's regulatory policy, it's a legal system that doesn't allow for oversuing, and it is putting policies into place in the public schools in particular that make them more accountable so you have a skilled workforce. Those four things, if you will put those into place, then allow the private sector to respond with the confidence that they know they're going to be able to keep more of what they work for. I think that's the real dilemma today. Because of a national health care program that people really don't know how it's going to affect them other than it's going to cost them more money at least, there's a real dampening down of hope, if you will, in the business community.
All right, but you talk about a lack of hope. In your state of Texas, we look at poverty, people who are suffering, who may be without hope. In the United States, that rate is 15.9%. It's higher in Texas at 17.9%.
Higher, I might add, even in California.
Mm-hmm. And we'll get to that in just a minute. And yet there's a debate about what you do to help people who are struggling around wages, around the minimum wage. Tim Pawlenty, who you ran against in 2012, was part of that presidential ticket there before he dropped out. He was on MSNBC this week. He said this about how Republicans ought to look at this minimum wage fight. Have a look.
I also think, by the way, the Republicans should support a reasonable increase in the minimum wage. You know, if you're going to talk the talk about being for the middle class and the working person, if we have a minimum wage, it should be reasonably adjusted from time to time.
Are the politics shifting in your party on that?
Well, we focus on the maximum wage rather than the minimum wage. 95% of all the jobs that were created in my home state were above the minimum wage. So the idea that you should be focused on the minimum wage when in fact you ought to be focused on policies that create this environment where jobs can be created. You know, this discussion about minimum wage when there are no jobs available, I mean, most of us didn't start in the corner office, David. I mean, your way up. And most people understand that concept. I think it's an easy political line to pitch out to say I'm for raising the minimum wage when we're looking past that in Texas from the standpoint of how do we create the maximum wage available? How do we put more people into the to the workforce? And almost a third of all jobs created in America in the last decade were created in the state of Texas. And that's where the focus should be. What are the policies that send the message to the job creators that you know that you can risk your capital, have a chance to have a return on investment, hire those people out there? That's the real issue. And I'll suggest to you one-size-fits-all policies out of Washington, D.C., tamping down that reasonable expectation of being able to create wealth.
A lot of talk about you running in 2016. You ran in 2012. A lot of people thought that was a botched effort on your part. How do you get a second look now?
I would tend to agree with them on the botched effort side of it.
So what went wrong?
Listen, I think America is a place that believes in second chances. I think that we see more character out of an individual by how do you perform after you fail and you go forward. So I'm really focused on the next 9 months of being the governor of the state of Texas. I'm going to be in Kevin City recruiting businesses. I'm going to be across the country talking about red state versus blue state policies, hopefully engaged in a good, thoughtful, winsome conversation about how do we make America more competitive, not only domestically but internationally as well.
But you also have to think about your party, about how to get a nomination. So when I ask you how to get a second look, what do you want to say to your party to say, look, here's the path to getting the White House back, and here's what Rick Perry can do to get us there?
Yeah. I think it's important for us to really listen to the American people. And I think Americans are really concerned about how am I going to be able to take care of my family. I'm really worried about those 90 million people that are out of work. I mean, the idea that there are more women out of the workforce now than at any time in our history, that's just not right. And there is a blueprint. There are blueprints in states like Florida and Louisiana, what Nikki Haley's doing in South Carolina. You look up at Ohio and what Kasich's doing. I mean, there's clear blueprint about how you get Americans back to work. And I hope that over the next 6 to 8 months as we go into those November elections, that there's a good focus on that type of an approach. The Republican leadership on job creation is pretty good in this country.
In Texas, it's a big state. There's a lot of political figures. You got Ted Cruz making waves, looking like he's going to run in 2016, and one former President Bush, who said this week he'd like for his brother Jeb to run for president. You know George W. Bush, the president, very well, having succeeded him as governor. Is there room in Texas for all of you in the presidential race?
Like you said, it's a big state.
So there is.
There's a big state.
Governor Perry, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For your time.
Good
we
to
hope to have you back.
Yes, sir. Thank you.